I'm Emily Young. I'm the Executive Director of the Nonprofit Institute here at the University of San Diego. And I am so honored to be hosting this conversation together with the University of San Diego, obviously, where the Nonprofit Institute is located, and the San Diego Foundation. And to mark Black History Month, we have this great privilege of spotlighting a conversation with Dr. Joy Spencer and Pamela Payton to really highlight how they too have played an outsized role in catalyzing transformational change in both higher education and philanthropy. And these two will be mostly in conversation today after I provide a brief introduction. But I'm really excited to kind of be listening into a conversation where they'll be looking at how they both approach intersecting issues of racism and poverty to really look at where are the new possibilities for bridging racial gaps in education and wealth, and ways to bring about more universal community prosperity. And with that, I wanted to give you a bit more background on our two speakers today. If you don't know them, they are both amazing in their own right. Dr. Joy Spencer, who is our interim dean here at the School of Leadership and Education Sciences, as well as a professor of mathematics education. Her work is centered on educational equity in higher and K through 12 education. And she is marking nearly 3 decades of work in this area, helping to launch a doctoral program in education for social justice, as well as implementing a school-wide professional development program on anti-racism that I was fortunate enough to provide in, and it's actually been exported to all across campus. And her research looks at mathematics learning opportunities of African American and other minoritized youth. And she has any number of programs, innovative programs that she's developed together with other faculty at the University of San Diego, as well as partners across our community. And I'll let Dr. Spencer talk more about her work as she and Pamela Payton join in conversation. And for a little bit about Pamela Payton's background, she's currently the Chief Impact and Partnerships Officer and Vice President of Community Impact at the San Diego Foundation, overseeing a number of community impact programs and the implementation of strategic initiatives at the San Diego Foundation to advance the quality of life for all San Diegans. She plays a critical role at the San Diego Foundation in developing cross-sector partnerships and implementing future strategic plans for the San Diego Foundation. She'll definitely share more about her work at the San Diego Foundation. And like Dr. Spencer, she works with a number of community-based organizations as well, and obviously has prior experience over 2 decades working at the University of San Diego. But in order to not take away too much from the conversation, you can read more about both of their bios and their backgrounds. And I'd really like to now turn to our 2 wonderful speakers today and just launch the first question. And then we're going to have about 35 minutes of conversation between Joy Spencer and Pamela Payton. And then we'll go back and circle back for question and answer from all of you. So please listen in, think about any questions you might have, any comments you want to leave in the chat. I will be monitoring that. And if you feel comfortable, please do turn on your cameras so we can create a more intimate sense of an audience here and a conversation with these 2 amazing luminary women. So with that, I'd like to start with you, and I'm going to call you both by your first names for the audience. I'd like to start with you, Joy. Could you just share a bit about where you grew up and what are some of the formative experiences that shaped who you are today?
Yes, thank you so much, Emily. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's a little overwhelming, all these wonderful colleagues and friends who have joined me. So I had to stop looking at the names because it's going to make me nervous. But more than anything, just a real pleasure to be here, Emily. Thank you for the invitation. It means a lot to me. Where did I grow up? Let's see. So I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in, South Central LA. If anybody on this call is from Los Angeles, I grew up near Crenshaw and Florence. So it is 2 hours north of San Diego, but it is like a lifetime away. Honestly, San Diego and Los Angeles, in my experience, could not be more different. But I grew up in a community that when I was a kid was full of love and full of community. We had a lot of external challenges in South Central LA, but I grew up in a community that was culturally affirming, culturally centered. And when you talk about the formative experiences, I had a lot of them. I grew up with lots of family. My grandparents kept me in line, both paternal and maternal. My mother and father kept me in line. My pastor, I used to go to the First AME Church of Los Angeles. Our pastor would stand us up in front of the church when report cards came out, and you had to actually show your report card. And so I grew up just in community of educators, people who were invested in my future and in my education. So I was really fortunate. One last thing I'll say is I was bused out to a lot of schools away from my neighborhood, and that had a big impact on me. It gave me a lot to think about. I got to see a lot of Los Angeles and a lot of the different cultures and communities. And also some early experiences that I had with, unfortunately, with racism came in those experiences, but those made me stronger. And I hope to be able to talk a little bit about that during this conversation. So I am going to ask Pam the same question. Pam, where did you grow up? I think I know. And what are some of your formative experiences that shaped who you are today?
Well, thank you, Joy. I'm going to begin first by just saying what an honor it is to be in this space with all of you today. Truly friends for a lifetime are on this Zoom, and women in particular who I would not have made it to this point in my career if not for the support and friendship of my group of girls that I just adore so very much, and they know who they are. It's just so beautiful to see all of you. So thank you for joining us. I grew up in San Diego. My family, my mother and I were nestled in small Paris, Texas, northeast of Dallas, maybe 150 miles northeast of Dallas, where my father had been working in a meat packing plant. My mother was a nanny to a group of little kids, a family of little kids who consistently called her nigger. And so my mother decided one day that we were no longer going to stay in San Diego, or excuse me, in Paris, Texas, where this 4 and 5-year-old family children were calling her names that she could not return to them. And so we jumped in a train, and my mother, with just with $10 to her name, boarded this train, Amtrak train from Texas to San Diego, so that she could find my father, who was on a ship somewhere in Southern California. She did not know exactly where he was. She did not know exactly how to find him, but we got on that train. I was a little girl at the time and headed to San Diego and landed at the Santa Fe Depot downtown. And my mother proceeded to find a phone booth and made numerous calls until she located my father, who was living on a ship at 32nd Street Naval Base. And that is how I began my life in San Diego. My mother began working at a lab at UC San Diego. My father, as I mentioned, was in the Navy. And over a period of time, she began to, her career began to grow. She was able to go back to school. She and my father built a lovely home for us in San Diego. I was the eldest of what eventually became a family of 3. And I graduated from high school in San Diego at a school in Spring Valley, Mount McGill High School. where the counselor said that I wasn't college material. And that left me wondering, my value. I didn't grow up with that affirming environment that you shared, Joy. I had two lovely parents who really adored me, but they couldn't coach me. They couldn't guide me. They didn't know more than I did. And so eventually I decided that I would go to a community college initially. I applied to four-year universities, graduated eventually from UC San Diego, and decided to stay in San Diego for a while, and eventually moved to Houston, and then came back to San Diego. The weather in Houston, if anyone knows, it's awfully humid and the bugs are really large. And I decided that was not meant for me. So eventually came back to San Diego, eventually finding my way to the University of San Diego, where I spent 24 years working as an administrator. And Joy, I think the next question is one that you're going to ask. Is there someone in your family or from your family who had a particular influence on you?
Yes, of course, like I said before, as I reflect, I had a lot of people in my family who, even in little ways, I grew up in a community where it wasn't, I knew people who had gone to college, but I had more people who were just aspirational. They had a lot of hope for me. And I'll say my mother in particular is a person who, she just was like a bulldog. She just made sure that I had everything that I needed, and it wasn't easy for her. Like I said before, when I was a kid, I would get bused, and you grew up in one neighborhood and you're literally waking up at 5 a.m. to be bused across town. And my mother really we didn't have transportation. We didn't have a car. So we rode the bus for the most part when we were growing up. So my mother would have to take off work, get on a bus, come all the way across town to talk with teachers, to do the advocating that she had to do for me. And she had to do a lot of it alone. But when I saw that it was just such an inspiration, because Pam, it sounds like we have some things in common. You said Texas. My dad is from Texas, and my mother, the Amtrak, at 19 years old, my mother got on an Amtrak train by herself in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and came out alone to Los Angeles to start her life. She just decided she could not live in a place that the way that she was seen would never let her become more than what she was seen as. And so that story has been part of my life, because my mother's was like a pioneer. She just decided, like, no, this is not enough. I'm not gonna, clean bathrooms for the rest of my life. I'm gonna have something different. And so her influence on me was truly the way she lived and the courage that she lived with. It didn't matter that she didn't have a college degree. You would have thought that she was like, she had a PhD. When she would go into those offices and talk to those teachers and talk to doctors or whoever it was, the type of ways in which she had to advocate for us is enormous. When I look back now in retrospect, I grew up in South Central LA, in the middle of really the drug wars, the murder capital, all those things. And in every way, we navigated all of it, but it was because my mother was doing it. And so she influenced me a lot. And, I've dedicated so many things that I've written to her. And then even our kids, my nephews, who I was fortunate enough to raise, so much of what happens with them is related to the influence that my mother had on us as a family. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, this piece of work is hard, but you're going to sacrifice and you're going to get it done. And I've said this before, but my mother was the mother who would tell me, I would come to her and say, this is so hard, I can't figure this out. And this is what she would always say: has it ever been done? And I was like, oh God, yeah, Ma, somebody's done it before. Well, then you can do it. But this is impossible. This is so hard. Has it ever been accomplished? Yes, it's been accomplished before. Well, then you can accomplish it. And that was the kind of, can you imagine at 4, 5, 6, 10 years old, coming to your mother like, oh my God, this is so tough. And her saying, well, if it's ever been done, you can do it. And if it hasn't, you can figure it out too. So I think she was the biggest influence. And of course, a number of teachers. I'm an educator, and you don't get to be an educator by not loving your teachers. So that was also a big part of my life. Can I ask you the same question? Who in your family had a particular influence on you?
You and I have more in common than we realized coming into this discussion. I really credit Bobby Gray, my mother, with providing me with the grounding that I needed to believe that anything was possible, regardless of what others might have said. My mother was just so amazingly influential. And though, as I said, she was very busy caring for my brothers, my father, and I had not at that point been graduated beyond high school. She was brilliant and very, very, very committed to education. But at that point, she had not been able to return to school herself and to go ahead and eventually graduate with her degree. Today, she has a master's degree. But at the time, my mother would always tell me that I could do anything. And I believed her. It didn't matter what the circumstances around me might have suggested. I believed my mother, and I lived a life of always wanting to make my parents proud, period. I wanted my parents to be proud of me, and that inspired me to do it. It inspired me to follow a pretty straight line. I did not want to preoccupy them with trouble or problems. They had enough of that with my brothers. And so I just, what do I have to do to fly under the radar? And if you see me or hear me, it's for something positive. That's what I did. And it was largely because my mother was just such a beautiful, caring, compassionate, supportive person that I just wanted to make her proud. And I still live that life today. My mother continues to be my number one fan, my number one advocate. She saw an article yesterday that included a story about me and took the magazine with her. I'm like, but that's my magazine. She's like, not anymore, it's mine. So that she continues to be that same person in my life. And I'm just so grateful, because so often young people don't have those people in their life who believe in them. And whether or not she could show me a better path, yeah. She couldn't. She didn't know it at the time. She believed that it was possible and helped me explore and find the right people to help guide me. And that is something that I wish more young people had access to today. And I'm grateful for those who do exist, whether it's in the schools, the counselors, the teachers, the advocates at church, or wherever young people may be, who inspire them and who help them craft and chart a path to lead them to their greatness, because it's in all of us, right? There is greatness in all of us, but so many of us will pass through life never being able to fully realize that, or to sing the song that we were brought here to sing. And so I have really worked hard at being that person for others, to try and inspire and encourage and help them to realize their greatest potential as well.
That's just beautiful.
I think we're going to talk a little bit about our career trajectories and how we got to where we are. I'm happy to just jump in and kind of answer the question. I started out in media and TV. So I worked for Channel 10 TV years ago. I did a little bit of work working for a city councilman in San Diego. And like you, Joy, I was always the one who was breaking barriers in my field, right? There weren't Black women in TV, but one day I was watching football probably with my dad, and I saw Jane Kennedy. She was a Black female sports announcer. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's possible. So that was my path. I was going to be a TV sports analyst and follow Jane Kennedy's path. I got as far as one helicopter ride with Channel 10, scared to death, did the story, and I thought, never again, this is not for me. So what path are we really going to be on, Pam? So I went into politics. I worked for a few different politicians, really enjoyed that work, left San Diego, moved to Houston. As I mentioned earlier, flew the skies, working for Continental Airlines in an administrative role, but got to do a lot of international travel, loved it. Eventually came back to San Diego, found myself trying to, figure out how I was going to get back into the work that I really enjoyed, which was community building. And eventually came to the University of San Diego in a role where I was a director of community and government relations. And, at the time there were no Black women in administration at USD. I may have been the second Black female administrator at the university at that time. And so creating pathways for the university to lower its walls. USD I had grown up in San Diego, as I mentioned. USD was not an institution at the time that was known well outside of its space in Linda Vista. The walls were very high and people did not generally come onto campus, and people within the campus did not go out into the community. And there was this wonderful person leading our community service learning team at the time, Judy Ronner, and we would sit around imagining, how do we lower those walls? How do we bring, the beautiful campus to the community? There were so many resources, richly surrounding us, but people in our immediate neighborhood, less than a mile away, had never, ever ventured to campus. So we really reimagined how we would build our community service program with Chris Nive and get more people from campus into the community, more people from the community to campus. That was the focus of my work for many, many years. I eventually moved into the other areas of university relations, oversaw communications and public affairs and all the different aspects of the community relations office. And at some point, my compadre who's on the call here, Dean Powell, and I sat around and thought, we are encountering student after student who was saying that USD is not feeling like their institution. They were enrolled there, they were students, but they just didn't feel that it was their school. And we wanted to know, how do we address the various issues that our students were encountering, such as a sense of community, such as preparation, such as mentorship. And so together we created a plan, really with several other colleagues eventually, that was ad hoc at first. And then we sat down with Joy and others and said, okay, we're going to institutionalize this. What does it look like? And we created the Black Student Resource, Black Student
BSRC, Black Student Resource Center.
Yes, I have lots of acronyms in my head. So it was that one. It was the BSRC. Anyway, okay. And we were able to build what we thought was needed for our Black students to begin to truly experience the richness that USD had to offer. And over time, saw that institutionalized. It became, there is a space now, there is a staff member, there is a Black grad ceremony, there is the celebration for students when they first get accepted and they come to campus during orientation. All of those things were the collaboration of this small group of like-minded people who just wanted to do what we believed was right for our campus. And that was in 2008, 2009, Pauline, right? Somewhere around that time frame. At some point, when my youngest daughter graduated from high school in 2019, I had to ask this question of myself, okay, Pam, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do? And I was involved with lots of nonprofits at the time, serving as a board member, or in a couple of cases, the chair of the board, and went to another friend who's on this call, Perla Myers, and said, Perla, I know what I want to do. I've got it all figured out. I want to bring resources to nonprofits. I want to match these really amazing nonprofits with dollars to invest in the community to do the work that they are so capable of doing. And she says, okay, what do we have to do? How are we going to do it? And I said, I don't have that part figured out now just yet, but I know what I want to do. And shortly thereafter, I called Pauline one day and said, you won't believe this, but I was just offered a position to do exactly that thing with the San Diego Foundation. So I'm now in a role where our team is responsible for all of our community investments through philanthropy. And one of the areas that we invest in deeply is in education. Through the form of scholarships and through the form of our other programs, College Scholars Initiatives, our Black Community Investment Fund, trying to create opportunities for students to go to college, to persist through college, to graduate from college at every level of the pendulum. And that's where I am today. And I really am grateful for this opportunity, love the work. There is so much need in our community right here in San Diego that our organization is constantly trying to find ways to invest in programs that are going to truly make an impact in the region.
Wow. Thank you, Pam. So I love the story about the helicopter. I'm going to have to learn more about that. That's really, that's exciting. So my career trajectory, sometimes I wonder like, wow, how did I get here where I am? I think I always knew that I wanted to do education work. And I understood even at a young age that education was liberatory. I knew it. Like I could tell that the type of education I was getting as a young person was going to have a huge impact on where I ended up as an adult. I saw it lived out in front of me all the time. And so I was making connections between education and liberation, education and opportunity as a young person. And so when I finished college, I immediately started teaching school in a place called East Palo Alto, California. I think we have some Bay Area folks on here. And I'm telling you, I was this broke teacher. I didn't have enough money to even really get to work. I mean, this sounds crazy, but I knew in my heart, I wanted to teach and I wanted to have impact in young people's lives. So I would take a bike, a train, and a bus every day to get to my public school teaching job, where I would basically spend my entire paycheck purchasing books, paper, pencils, and pens for my kids because they were my kids and because their education meant everything to me. When I saw them, I knew I was like, this is my family. These are my people. And I could see the neglect going on in the district. I could see what was happening to them. And I would teach. I would be so exhausted at the end of the day. I would lay my head on my desk and take a 45-minute power nap. It was like I could not do it. So 45 minutes, then I'd wake up and I would work for the next 3 or 4 hours. I usually left around 7 or 8 every night. It would often be dark. I set up the class for the next day and I'd turn around and do it again. And I could see then again that education was changing these young people's lives. But I knew I wanted to have a larger influence. I loved them. I loved the work. I could not deal with the dysfunction that I found a lot in the public school system. I felt broken by how much those kids were going to be impacted because of a system that was so unjust. And so I knew I wanted to have broader impact. Anyway, I eventually made my way back to Los Angeles. I was in a doctoral program in mathematics education and in urban education. We don't have the time for me to talk about why mathematics and what mathematics really did for me and the ways that it continues to be one of the most persistent gatekeepers in our society today. And in the state of California, mathematics continues to be the place where that is keeping hundreds of thousands of young people out of higher education, keeping them out of opportunities, even within middle school and high school. And mathematics, in my opinion, is an unearned privilege that mathematics has, but it's doing it. And mathematics teachers and the system of mathematics education is implicated. And that's why I've spent so much of my career trying to bring down these walls related to mathematics and who gets to be part of it and who doesn't. And who gets to take mathematics, believe it or not, even determines who gets to take science, who gets to even enjoy their high school experience or their college experience. So mathematics is this point, it's like a pivot point of opportunity. And I saw that as a teacher, which is why I taught math as a middle school teacher. And I see it today. And I've been doing all sorts of work for many, many years related to that field. I have two wonderful colleagues on the phone or on the call, Odesma and Perla. I see them here. And we run something called STEAM Academy, which is really about reshaping how young people see themselves in relationship to mathematics and STEM. This is not just a K-12 issue. This is a life opportunity issue, which is why I've sunk my heels in on so many occasions related to mathematics and related to STEM. But all that to say, I finished up at UCLA, and they actually had a position here at USD. When you finish your doctoral program, there's basically only a certain number of positions in your field open every year, annually. So there were about 4 or 5. Some of them were out of my league, or as far as I didn't want to leave the state of California. So I applied here. I got the job offer. And since I've been here, I've just kind of been beating the exact same drum, which in my opinion, if you want to be a leader, you have to figure out what you are meant to do, what you're supposed to be doing, and you just keep doing it. Maybe that's craziness on my part. It has certainly cost me certain things. It's cost me friends, it's cost me jobs, it's cost me whatever, but in my mind, it's also won me a lot, because I've been beating the drum around equity and opportunity and education as a tool for liberation again and again and again. And I've seen the impact. I see young people who are working on their PhD today that didn't even think they could finish their bachelor's degree. So, when I look at that, it's like that PhD is going to literally change their family's life. It's going to change the future for them. So a lot of my work in both K-12 and here in higher education has been about taking the voiceless, the people who never speak, the folks who are on the margins, and saying, let's recenter, let's recalibrate. We have, over the last 2 years here in Souls, we have just taken I believe in producing and being productive with my time. We have just implemented just wide sweeping opportunities for folks to learn about anti-racism, to grow in their understanding of equity and transformation. And we've just been hitting it again and again and again. And so that's what I've been up to. I can share other things, but really, I think my work has been about educational equity and opening up doors. And when I think of that, when I think about the work you're doing, Pam, and the work you're doing to open up doors of financial opportunity to African Americans and marginalized communities in San Diego, for me, it is a parallel path. This is a moment of transformation. When African Americans get access to housing in the state of California, that turns the tide on what is happening, because that wealth gap in this country has not shifted since the Civil War. And here we are. I don't know how much y'all know about the work that Pam is doing, but it's such an inspiration for me. I feel like we kind of riff off of one another, but I just see education as a tool of liberation, and that's just the work I'm just committed to.
Thank you, Joy. When you talk about math education, I today will have a nightmare that I am one class away from graduating, and it's a math class.
Yes.
And that is largely attributed to a childhood where I was told, you're not great at math. That's not your thing. And it sticks with me even today. And granted, at this point, I have a master's degree as well, but it's ingrained in us at a very early age, right? And if you can encounter that educator, that teacher who not only tells you, but shows you that you are capable and that you are skilled, you can develop that because you've got the confidence that is foundational to being able to achieve whatever you want to do. So I applaud you and all of our math educators on this call and so many others. Teachers are so essential. And having teachers who believe in their students and inspire their students and show them how makes all the difference in its trajectory. I was on a call just earlier today. We were talking with a group that is helping to address youth violence in San Diego. And one of the problems that we have is that these children at a very early age are not encouraged by their success academically. And so they find other communities, they find other pathways, often unhealthy, unsafe pathways to express themselves. And, you know, in that group might be a future doctoral student math educator, but if I can't get them through life to realize that, we'll never be able to see what they might have become. You know, our work at the San Diego Foundation, for me, I joined the foundation in June of 2020. We all know what was happening at the time. And the foundation had just embarked on its COVID community response work. And the COVID community response work gave the foundation resources that it had never seen before. $69 million or approximately total giving came into the San Diego Foundation to be invested in the community. And so our team's responsibility was to take those dollars and distribute those dollars to the nonprofits in our region that were serving the pressing needs of our community. And so there were some things that we just had to do. We had to provide money to organizations that are feeding people. You know, we had to provide money to people who were at risk of losing their housing. We had to help fill the gap for folks who lost their jobs. So many people lost their jobs, particularly those that were in the service industry or in tourism industry, people whose educational achievements didn't allow them to work from home, you know, whereas so many of us were able to work or to be students at home. And so our organization, which is one that inspires enduring philanthropy to create community solutions, distributed the money to those community organizations who then use those dollars to support the community needs, whatever those needs were. And there are over nearly 400 different nonprofits that we worked with at that time. But what it showed us as an organization was that the path forward could not look like where we had been as an organization. The path forward had to take into account everything that we were learning from our community partners, from our communities, from San Diegans, to help them move beyond the crisis into a moment where everyone can eventually enjoy prosperity. But what are the ways that we do that? And as we reflected, you know, we certainly recognize that within the African American community, and this, I should also note, this was a week after George Floyd was murdered, that I joined the foundation. We saw that when we looked at the disparities that existed in San Diego, the African American community was suffering the most. You know, there were a lot of people suffering, but as a population, the African American community, due to generations of systemic racism and disparities, was really struggling. And the path forward for African Americans was going to be even more challenging, perhaps, than some other populations. So we thought we would jump in where we know best, and that is to create a Black Community Investment Fund. And you alluded to that earlier when you were asking about the housing work. We jumped into this, we created this fund, invited people to join us in making investments in organizations that were supporting essentially the generational wealth building of Black San Diegans. So that was through education, through employment and job training, through entrepreneurship, and through home ownership, because Black San Diegans have the lowest percentage of home ownership of any population in San Diego. And that is largely attributed to redlining. It's attributed to underemployment. It's attributed to under-educating Blacks, to really keeping Blacks from prospering, from being successful academically, and professionally. And so when you do that to people, you keep them from ever being able to purchase homes because they don't have the resources to purchase homes. And so what happens, you're perpetuating the system where of underachievement because I don't have access to the resources that will help me do better. That is where we came in with our program and are very focused on addressing three of the disparities through our nonprofit partners. And the fourth, the home ownership piece, we're actually granting dollars directly to people through a nonprofit to help them buy homes. So we just celebrated on Friday a press conference with a buyer where we are now at 18 buyers, 18 families or individuals who are homeowners directly because they received this grant and support from this team of partners that we're working with. And though I wasn't able to be there because of another commitment, Senator Tony Atkins, our Senate Pro Tempore, was here to celebrate with us. Sarah Jacobs, Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs was here, as was Councilmember Monica Montgomery Stepp and others to celebrate this program that is so rewarding for us at the San Diego Foundation and for the buyers who are homeowners. You know, they're just as deserving. But if you are kept out of the market and your families and generations of your families have been kept out of the market, homeownership seemed like a very, very distant dream. That dream has been realized for this small group of people. We're going to continue to build on it and expand it and grow, adding more BIPOC communities to the program in years to come. Now, one of the questions that Joy and I were asked to answer is about the work that we do and you know, the sense of purpose that we find in our work. And I will just say that I am personally, I wake up every day and just pinch myself because I get to do something that means so much to me. And that is to enable other people to be successful, enable other people to be able to realize their dreams, enable, you know, our environmental team to support organizations that are doing their very best to save our planet. You know, we need all of these organizations to be successful, and that is what we are trying to do, is cultivating a rich nonprofit community in San Diego that can respond to the needs of our region.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you. Just an inspiring conversation, and we're certainly getting a lot of comments in the chat that says the same. And also, I know Odesma, before she left, she did have a question for you all. And I also wanted to point out that if you want more information about the Black Homebuyer Program, that's also been posted in the chat by Rihanna Hill. Odesma's question was, what is one of the biggest challenges that you're facing in fulfilling your current mission? And what is a key strategy that has helped you to overcome or persevere in spite of it? So big challenge, and then a key strategy you've used to address it.
Who would like to go first? Pam, you want me?
Oh, you go right ahead.
Sure. So in thinking about challenge, I think, to be honest, if you're a person of purpose, there will always be challenge. And especially if you're going to do something related to the liberation of people who are oppressed. Because unfortunately, we live in a society where there's a benefit to keeping others oppressed. And so the moment you call out and say, look, we're going to take those folks who, I mean, that's why the pushback on CRT, it's not about a philosophy. It's about the fact that if we all of a sudden take all the folks who've been marginalized and we center their voice and their cause, well, then that implicates the folks who have power, and it's going to have impact on them as well. So I think the biggest challenges have always been, for me, have always been related to other individuals who maybe they are threatened they're threatened by the fact that that they've been the winners all along, the unquestioned winners. And that when you look at things again and you try to reshuffle the deck and you say, let's make this more equitable. Why do we keep ending up with the exact same winners and losers? I mean, if I know who's going to win before I play the game, it's not fair. And we have that in education all the time. That was my experience going to school. We already knew who was going to get the awards at the end of the year. Why did we even go through this charade? So I'm about like, let's shake it up and let's think about that. But in the process of doing that, of course, those who've had power and unearned privilege, that's gonna really, they're gonna have to wrestle with that, or they're gonna protest it. And so you got to have people who have enough vision to see what's going on and to understand when they see complaints that those are in relationship to people being their privilege being questioned. And so I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm talking on too esoteric of a level, but I think that's the challenge is, number one, making sure that folks who have been disempowered see that they have way more power than they ever thought they did, because a lot of times folks who have been oppressed or marginalized don't think that they have anything to say, and then they're silent and they get sidelined. And then the other real challenge is being able to navigate and be okay. I'm okay with criticism, quite frankly, but being able to understand that when you receive that critique and those criticisms, that it's because folks don't like being pushed out of a comfort zone and pushed out of their privilege. And navigating it, I think that's a great question. I think a way to, how do you lead despite it? I think you have to understand where you're going. You have to really understand. I know for me, I understand that the folks who came before me, they encountered so much worse. And so I understand that there is a price to pay for changing, for change. There's a price to pay. There's a bit of, of pain that we're going to endure if you ever want to truly change anything. And I've seen a lot of change since I've been in higher education. Since I've been at USD, I've seen us build new programs. I've seen us do things. And when I look at the benefit of those things, it helps me walk through the valley easier. It's like, okay, this is a valley. It's a valley because, anybody who ever wants to do anything of importance is going to suffer. And that's all right. I had breakfast today, I had lunch, I have everything I need. I have a car. So that suffering is nothing. If the benefit on the other end is that a young person has better access to education. So to me, just keep it in perspective.
And Pamela, I don't know if you want to answer that question or another couple questions that have come in. This is such a rich conversation. So I don't want to overlook the questions and also don't want to cut you all off. But some other questions about, in addition to that, how, considering how hard you've worked to strengthen and empower our communities. Thank you, by the way. How has self-care changed for you over time, if at all? How do you work through the passion tax, where your passion drives you to go above and beyond more often than others with little recognition of your efforts? How do you stay joyful and hopeful? They're all kind of, I think, facets of the same bigger question. But if you want to answer any of those, Pamela, or the one that Joy also answered.
I will say this. I believe that service is the price that I pay for my existence. And I am able to serve. I am able to be a vehicle for our organization, for our community, for people who are under-resourced, underserved. And that is why I'm here. I won't be here forever. I won't be able to do this work forever. But while I can, it's what fuels me. I am not great at balance. So I'm not going to stand here and suggest that I am. I have not, I don't take a lot of time for self right now because there's just so much work to do. If we all look around us, the crisis in Ukraine right now, the crisis that the pandemic has left us with, the social justice unrest, the needs are pressing. You know, the voter suppression that is happening across our country. There is a crisis right now, every direction that you turn, and I can't close my eyes to any of it. So I pace myself to some degree. I don't sleep much, but I don't want to right now because there are things to do. And when I sleep, I'm thinking about it all. And so I know that I'm not unique in this way. You know, we're living in critical times, and I have a granddaughter who I absolutely adore, and I want to leave the world better for her and for future grandchildren than the world that we see right now. And so for me, that means that I don't get to rest. You know, I have work to do. And I say that to all of you, wherever you are, whatever you do, there is a role for you to play as well. And I know many of you personally, and I know that you're already doing that. And to each of you, I just express my sincere gratitude for all of you. You know, I'm looking at Susan right now. Susan has changed the future and the face of engineering in our country through her work and support and advocacy for all young students, but particularly young female students. I'm just grateful. And, you know, the question about how do I stay fueled? I'm just grateful. You know, I really am. And that fuels me. I'm a very faithful person as well. And I lean on my faith to just carry me sometimes when I don't have the answer. I also have really, really great colleagues. I have really, really great colleagues and a wonderful support system. Many of my colleagues are with us right now. And I'm very, very fortunate and very grateful.
Well, thank you both. And I know another question came in from Matthew, and you kind of alluded to it too in your last comments, Pamela, about what really, I'm sorry, now it just moved. How do you approach your work spiritually and what guides your movement? I don't know if either of you want to talk a little bit more about that. It will be probably the last question of the day, as well as any final reflections.
Yeah, I would add, and thank you for that question, Matthew, that I really work hard to be able to listen. I was taught that humility and what you do is more important than what you say, which is probably why someone like Pam said, I don't have a ton of balance. But to me, what you do should speak way louder than what you say you're doing. And so in that regard, that like really working hard to listen and then move and do the work because of what I've heard and what I've seen. So I am prayerful. I heard Pam say that faith is important to me, that I work really hard to listen and to be quiet. I do practice quietness. I definitely do. I do practice a sabbatical once a week, a Sabbath. I do take 24 hours a week where I am not doing anything except, you know, just being still and you know, out doing my walks. Now, I've had an injury for about a few months, a really bad sciatica injury, but I'm back walking now. That revives me. I love California. I was born and raised in California. So the outdoor environment inspires me, and I have to, at least once a week, I have to look at a broom baccharis or a laurel sumac or some type of plant. I've got to go look at it and touch it and give it a hug because that's just who I am. And Emily knows that. I've spent lots of my life just in the natural environment. If all it is a walk at Balboa Park, it doesn't matter to me. It could just be a walk around the block. It revives me. So that, you know, that's all I can say. My ancestors also inspire me. I know that people have prayed for me to be where I am. And so that grounds me and realizing where I really could have ended up in my life. I'm very clear. I know without a doubt, I know where folks who I grew up with are. I know where many of them ended up. I know the fate. And so I feel like I have a responsibility.
Pamela, why don't we finish with you? I just, that was really, those are very moving words, Joy. And I know personally, having had you as a leader for our school, I am just inspired on a daily basis by the kind of leadership that you provide and how you've inspired and taught and mentored so many of us. So thank you so much for the work that you do. And Pamela, I'd like to leave it off then with you. And I hope you both get a chance to read more in the chat. I think this has really resonated with our audience today as well.
I, appreciate this conversation and the time with all of you. If I have not left you with anything, it's that you all play an important role, in the lives of our community, and collectively, there is so much that we can do together to impact a better future for our families, for our children, for our communities, for our region, for our country, for our world. And I would say to you, just find a place to get involved, whether it's through philanthropy or through volunteerism. The needs are all around us, and find a place to get involved. You will find that work to be so affirming in a way that will lift you beyond anything that you might imagine. And it doesn't take much. It really doesn't take much. I have enjoyed my work immensely, and I just can't imagine a different life. So seeing students on the call like Bayu, thinking about our early conversations when she was an undergraduate at USD, just reminds me of the why we do what we do. And I just thank all of my USD colleagues, my friends, for all the work that you do today and have done over many, many, many years. You've really made a difference in the lives of so many students, and just carry on. It's harder than ever, perhaps, but more needed than ever. And I just encourage all of you, especially you, Emily, just to carry on.
Well, two incredibly visionary, transformative leaders. And we appreciate your time today, everything that you shared with us. Thank you so much to our wonderful audience. Thanks for staying engaged the entire time. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. What a wonderful way to mark the end of Black History Month, but certainly not the end of the work. And the work that's worth doing is always the work that's the hardest. So thank you so much for all of your service. And I hope all of you have a wonderful evening.